President of Pune Management Association, to please give us an introductory address for PMA. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ruma Madam. On behalf of Pune Management Association, I once again welcome you all for the very informative and interesting webinar need of an hour. And on behalf of all the participants and Pune Management Association and all our partners, PC, Aspire, Women Empowerment, I extend my warm welcome to Advocate Ritu Agvekar Madam. Let me say something about Pune Management Association. As Madam has said, it's one of the leading organizations in the field of management. We are proud to call ourselves as the bank of experts in the management field, and we extend our help to the youngsters, particularly the youngsters and young professionals, through various programs. For that, we have designed 14 different verticals. We call them as Center of Excellence COEs, which we are extending our activities. And this activity is one of the joint activities of academics as well as entrepreneurship COEs. For entrepreneurs, yes, we have large number of activities. Particularly, you may be interested in one activity which is required by practically almost all the entrepreneurs, that is mentorship. We are proud that more than 150 entrepreneurs are working through their verticals, through these vertical COEs, mainly to help the entrepreneurs to rise in their own field and businesses. So I don't take much time. I invite you all to visit our website, Pune Management Association website, to see and understand more details about Pune Management Association. And I also invite you to join our programs which are being regularly. In fact, we have 10 to 12 programs every month. So I invite you all to join these programs. Thank you. Thank you for participation. And once again, welcome the resource person, Advocate Ritu Agvekar Madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are really glad and we are really thankful that you have given us at PMA such a beautiful working body where we could network, we could connect, and we can enhance our entrepreneurial skills. Without wasting time, I would go further ahead and would request all the collaborators, of course, one by one, to come ahead, to come forward, and as representatives of their organizations, of their excellences and working bodies. I would first invite COE Academics Director, Dr. Sachin Sakre, to present Center of Excellence Academics.
Yeah. Good evening, all of you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah. So good evening, all of you, and I welcome on behalf of COE Academics all the participants and speaker of today's webinar, Ms. Ritu Agarwal ma'am, Ritu Agvekar ma'am. And the topic is really interested. COE Academics is established as Sri Professor rightly mentioned. There are various verticals. One of them is the COE Academics, and it is established with the vision of bridging the gap between industry and academia. So we are having PMA student chapters. We are having PMA various programs. We are having programs for the faculty members, bridge that particular gap, and we are planning for some skill upgradation programs, how we can make students engineering, management, and other students employable, how we can increase their employability. That is the vision of this particular COE Academics. We are having 4 verticals here. One is research, one is student engagement, one is industry alignment, industry related things. So these are the different verticals, and we sub verticals of this particular COE Academics, and there are various vice presidents who are working there. And COE Academics usually organizes such kind of programs specifically for the academicians and students and other industry people also. So this time this is the one program. Next program we are organizing on 20th, which is again related to the some positive energy from the dance moves and all, something like that. So I request all of you to participate actively, and whatever may be the queries, then that we are ready to take that queries at the end. You can post your queries in the text box also. So thank you for participating, and thanks to speaker Ritu ma'am for agreeing to our request and delivering the things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakre. I would now request Mr. Sopan Agaw, Director, Center of Excellence, Entrepreneurial Development, to please present himself.
Thank you, Ruma ma'am. Good evening all for today's startup, a legal topic jointly organized by we. Thank you, Ruma ma'am. So, good evening all. Welcome you all for today's program, Women Startup, a legal perspective, jointly organized by COE Academics and COE ED. At COE ED, we want to help to aspiring entrepreneurs, existing MSME, small scale businesses, women entrepreneurs. We conduct generally expert sessions, panel discussions, various workshops, even first generation entrepreneurs interviews at our COE ED on regular basis. We have different sub verticals also. The purpose of these sub verticals is to focus with the different aspects of entrepreneurship development. One of them is women entrepreneurs, which is led by the Smita Deshpande madam. And purpose of this sub vertical woman entrepreneur is to help the aspiring women entrepreneurs. Already Pradeep sir told us about the mentor support system. So again, I would like to appeal on this platform that we have good mentors with us, those who can guide, those who can extend their support to the aspiring entrepreneurs. So please take benefit of this. I will not take much time. I would like to thank PMA for giving us this opportunity. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Sachin Sakre, Bruma ma'am, Smita Deshpande ma'am for organizing this wonderful session. Uh, we are eager to listen our today's speaker, Advocate Ritu Agvekar ma'am. Ma'am, once again, welcome you. Thank you all, and hand over to
Madam, you are on mute.
Thank you, Sopan sir. I would now like Mrs. Samida Gandhi, Director, Aspire Knowledge and Skills, to please present herself. Mrs. Samida Gandhi, yeah.
Am I audible? No?
Yes,
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
good evening.
I'm Samida Gandhi, Director of Aspire Knowledge and Skill India Private Limited. We have trained near about 50,000 plus students in last 24 years across 5 states in India through a network of 120 franchisee. We are also NSDC funded partner. Recently, through PMA, we are establishing incubation center to set up, operate, and manage under Smart City Funding Solapur. I am happy to share we have recently planning to launch our new startup, A-Store, a multi-brand mobile repair studio. This will be organized in a chain for repairing of mobile phones, laptops, and tablets. In this organization, we are also focusing on women entrepreneurship and weaker section of the society. It has already have received, we have already received startup certificate from Niti Aayog and endorsed by Telecom Sector Skill Council.
Thank you, Samida ma'am.
Yeah, and thanks to PMA for giving the chance to aspire.
Thank you. I will now request Women Empowerment Cell, Ms. Siddhi Salunke. She is President at Women Empowerment Cell. Ms. Siddhi Salunke, Women Empowerment Cell. Please give a brief introduction.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I am Siddhi Salunkia, currently pursuing my BTech degree in Civil Engineering in VIIT Pune. I'm glad to share you that WEC was established in 2017 and started by whole VIIT students. And our faculty coordinator is Professor Leena Deshpande, ma'am. So basically, our main motto is to solve problems faced by women, the gender discrimination, to attain, maintain, and mental and physical health, then female infanticide, and many more. And also, I would like to share one thing that our college students, including boys, also thought of establishing this cell so that not only we would empower women or girls, but also we would encourage them to do everything they wish of. So I would like to thank you, ma'am, for giving this me an opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, endorsements. You should feel lucky that we have got so many big bodies and so many esteemed, prestigious people around, and there's no pun in it. Definitely, they will be.
Uh, yeah. Hello.
I suppose the voice is breaking. We could take you, Apurva, a bit later.
Yeah, we could.
I
Yeah,
think the
later.
connection would be fine by then.
Yeah, later. No issue. No issues
Yeah.
later.
We'll shift to Ms. Swati Gaisa. She is Executive Director, Yash Prabha Group, who's representing Laghu Udyog Bharti. We are glad to have you here, Ms. Swati Gaisas.
Yeah, namaskar. Uh, I'm representing Lagodhyog Bharti. Lagodhyog Bharti or LUB. I will just give you a brief introduction about the organization. LUB is the only national level industrial association which is working for MSMEs. Since its inception in 1994, LUB now has more than 25,000 members all over India, and it has active offices in around 450 districts in India. LUB or Lagodhyog Bharti, that's a short form. It has a seat on 27 government appointed committees which are working for the MSMEs in India. Lagodhyog Bharti also represents MSME interests at ILO, which is the International Labour Organization. And in the current advisory board to the Ministry of MSME, Lagodhyog Bharti has a 6-seat representation for the MSMEs. On my personal front, I come from a manufacturing background. My companies, which come under Yashaprabha group of companies, they are into engineering and electronics. So I come from a core manufacturing background. As a manufacturer and as a representative of MSME, we are very happy to be associated with PMA, who also work for issues like skill management and implementation of best practices, which are of very much of interest for the MSME. So thank you, PMA, and Lagodhyog Bharti is very happy to be associated with you. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Very nice presentation. I would request Dr. Bharti Jadhav, member IMED, and she's also assistant professor and head Department of Entrepreneurship Development. Ms. Bharti, would you present yourself?
Yes. Good evening. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to have here actually because I see all the guests. They are so much of having experiences from varied areas, as well as I'm looking forward to have a very interesting topic from Ritu ma'am. So thank you organizers actually arranging this and giving this platform for all of us to be connected. Let me give you a brief introduction of our institute. I belong to Bharati Vidyapit University, which is founded by Honorable Dr. Patangrabji Kadam in 1964. And we are the Institute of IMED, which is Institute of Management and Entrepreneurship Development. So basically, we focus on not only making students managers, but we also want our students to become entrepreneurs. And with that vision, we have an entrepreneurship development cell in IMED. I look after that cell wherein we have a lot of activities for students which can give them a platform to enhance their skills. We have a lot of guest sessions and experts mentoring to the students who are interested in starting their own businesses. Rather, we give them guidelines or we give them some input so that they can come up with their ideas which we can develop into their startups. So I'm really happy that today we have people who can help us in this endeavor. to make our students budding entrepreneurs. So I'm really thankful to be here today. Thank you, ma'am. I don't want to waste time. We are really looking forward to hear from Ritu Agvekar, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We welcome everybody for the webinar. Today's topic is Women Startup, a Legal Perspective. The topic is being presented by none other than Advocate Ms. Ritu Agvekar. Today's speaker is a very experienced entrepreneur with a very bold and broad outlook towards the society. She has a career of about 20 years or more. Her expertise is in real estate, general corporate, and commercial transactions. She has been associated with India's renowned law firms. She is currently associated with her own law firm, which is known as R. Agvekar and Associates. The firm has clients across all the verticals. A few of her accolades include being external member to Posh. She has featured in various talk shows, magazines. She has represented as a panelist. She has received Women Achievers Award on International Women's Day 2017. She was recently recognized as the 100 most powerful women in business by the Confederation of Indian Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, short form is CIMSME, in March 2021. She holds an honorary post of director, legal and compliance with them. In her entrepreneurial field, she has founded an all-women's group, Women Power Within, to promote co-creation and collaboration. She is also an advanced pranic healer and pranic psychotherapist. So, Advocate Ritu Agvekar, welcome aboard, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, all of you. In fact, having heard such dignitaries and all established people, Ruma ma'am, you are right that, I just feel that I have joined the correct forum. It was just today that I submitted my application as well for PMA, and I have no iota of doubt that, I'll be benefiting from the knowledge sharing and the networking that I would be getting on this platform. Really happy to be here. Thank you for all these speakers here. I have been able to pen down a few names. If I have missed out on any, I extend my respects to them as well. Mr. Tupe, Mr. Adav, Mr. Supan, Sumedha ma'am, Siddhi, Aparna, Bharti ma'am, and Ruma ma'am. I mean, all of you, thank you so much for having me here. So if permitted, I can start with my, I have made it a very inclusive presentation, but I think with women here who are already into entrepreneurial feats and they have already established themselves, there would be a lot of learning for me also when it comes to the execution side. The topic today remains legalities, right? And it is something which will come to our mind at the end when everything is done and when something goes wrong. Trust me when I say this, that when I introduce myself as a lawyer, the first reaction that I get of people is, oh my God. But that is not the case. A lawyer will always come handy and will be your savior right from the beginning. 2020 has put all of us into a situation where we got an awareness of the fact that all of us should have had a lawyer yesterday and not tomorrow, right? There were contracts which were going haywire. There were terminologies, there were paragraphs, there were clauses which were not providing for that contingency, because none of us expected ourselves to be in a situation which we were in the past 2.5 years now. Having said that, what also mushroomed were women entrepreneurs. We saw the birth of cloud kitchens, we saw home bakers, we saw small entrepreneurs, we saw budding entrepreneurs, we saw women entrepreneurs. And trust me, women started analyzing themselves, they started establishing themselves, they started looking at themselves from the point of view of being an entrepreneur as well. All the while, when the women workforce has been confined to the limited scope and services that they could offer, there was a whole new platform which was open to them in the form of the business mindset. And I think all of us here would agree to the fact that the impetus that 2020 situation put all of us through was that there was birth of women entrepreneurs, me being no exception to that. Now, let me tell you, before I get into the legalities and the compliances and the licenses and the certifications, lot of technical part of it, Why I call myself a birth of 2020 is because I started my independent setup in 2019, and 2020 actually gave a setback because none of us nearly knew where we were going in terms of business, in terms of professions, in terms of the area of practice. And that was a time when we were put to a lot of introspection, and we came out with varied modes of functioning, one being the online mode of functioning. Trust me when I say this, that I found a new method of working, and I knew that there can be a hybrid mode of functioning also, which can be as profitable and beneficial. And with this, the liberty and the privilege and the flexibility of working from anywhere that you are opened the global markets to all of us, I being no exception. So, here today, even if I have 25 years of experience as a lawyer, I still call myself a startup in terms of the awareness and the plethora of opportunities that it opened for me in terms of the global market, which became available to me, which otherwise wouldn't have been because I wouldn't have looked beyond the boundaries of Pune, Maharashtra, right? I'm sure everybody is going to say in affirmative about this. Coming back to the topic today, and we're going to stick to women entrepreneurs, I think any startup for anybody is the same. The legalities remain the same. My main focus is going to be women startups because women generally, and I am really concentrating, and I'm really going to stick to entrepreneurs who have just started and who have just begun, or maybe in anticipation that they're studying today and they want to start something tomorrow. I have a sincere advice that even if you don't hire a lawyer, run your documents through a lawyer. And there is a difference between the two, right? Always have a lawyer handy, because if you don't want to land yourself in soup tomorrow, the lawyer is going to take care of your problems today. The first and the foremost requirement that you start any business in India from the legal perspective is identifying the legal entity. And I think there is where you require a compliance specialist, a lawyer to really put it through, document it, make it lucid so that it is understandable by the people at large. Second step, which is in consonance with the first, comes the legal documentation. And the third is the main category, which is regulations, certifications, licenses, and compliances. We will be broadly classifying today's presentation in these three categories today, right? Now, when I say that, the business entity is the most important aspect of going ahead, you may have a product in mind, you may have a service in mind, you may have the entire skill set to do that, but you have to identify your business, you have to give it a company structure. And when it comes to a business or a company structure, individuals should wisely choose, because it's a one-time exercise. It's going to stay for a longer time. This is where your goodwill actually establishes. And in times to come, it is going to build from that, right? So business structure, an entity or a business, entity name, the company structure is what is extremely required to reach the desired targets and profitability in times to come. The starting point here, of course, remains you should be able to identify where do you recognize yourself to be, how far you want to scale up your business to. Product identification, relating it to the futuristic market, is the first thing that you do that. Now, being a legal person, this, of course, doesn't come in my ambit so much, but your identification and clear idea about where and in what capacity you do want to do business will identify the post identification and choosing of the business entity when a lawyer and the compliance specialist comes into picture, right? So you can either choose from being a sole proprietor, you can be in partnership, you can be in an LLP, which is called the limited liability partnership, a private limited company, or a public limited company, based on the choices that you have. Of course, you have choices to go back and change the structure of the entity, because that can always be done based on what kind of response you get in times to come. It is all a matter of time, and it's a matter of money also. So going one step behind, when we speak about identifying the legal entity, say for instance, you are a sole proprietor today, it's a small setup. You start from a very small product, and you have a very, I will not say small vision, I'll say your vision is very big, but you want to start and you want to kickstart the business, so to say. So you work in the capacity as a sole proprietorship, but you plan ahead. You plan to have a team ahead. You plan the profitability ahead. You have the project report in place. And all of this needs to be documented so that you can follow a charter. right? And this is what will identify your parameters of going ahead in your business and your idea of scaling up the business up to a certain level. Having said this, the first perspective that a legal angle, that the first legal perspective that a lawyer would give you is to have what is called a founder's agreement. Now, this document is not very common in terms of people relating to it, because often what happens is that, you know, when you start the business, maybe you don't have that kind of vision to anticipate what can come in your way, what eventually you can scale up to, what kind of a team size you will have, what kind of a profit sharing you can have. So these kind of things can always remain. But I think whenever you talk about a startup, whenever somebody is thinking about starting something, and here on this platform, obviously we're talking of something when we're talking about a structured startup, when we're talking about a structured business model, and which requires a lot of planning. The first and foremost document that is advisable and should be in place is the founder's agreement. What would a founder's agreement be? A founder's agreement would ideally have the vision of the founder, may or may not be the person is wanting a co-founder, the ideology, the product, the strategies of marketing, scaling it up, networking, reaching out, whether it is B2B, B2C, the HR policy in place, the IP, you know, all of that vision is then in the nutshell in the founders agreement. The founders agreement may not be relatable maybe, you know, 3 years down the line. Now let's see, any business for that matter takes 3 years to really establish, or maybe 5 years. But at the end of the third year, mostly, you know, all of us do get an idea about where are we heading towards. You may want to reread the founders agreement and amend it, and that's fine. But in the absence of a founders agreement, there is always a possibility that you may miss out on the final details of the legalities to come in future. Now that's your anticipation, which you are actually producing and which you're writing in the document today. So subject to the amendments which you will be doing in future, a founders agreement today will always give you, it's your Bible to a startup. It's your Bible, your roadmap to what you want to do 10 years, 5 years, how you want to scale up. And you can always revert back to the founders agreement and make amendments to that, right? Now, because broadly speaking, this particular document is going to have your objective, your men and material, and you know, everything related to that, including the compliances that you would require once you move on from one category, one legal entity to another legal entity. Once the legal entity is in place, of course, you identify with the name. The name can be in the form of a logo. It needs to be copyrighted. There has to be maybe, you know, you protect your copy. You need not trade. The trademark registration may come on later, but your copywriting can always start from the day you actually enter into a founders agreement. So all these things go simultaneously hand in hand, and you provide for that in the founders agreement. The next thing which comes into being are your contracts. Because the moment, even if you are a small entrepreneur, maybe, you know, your setup is a very small setup where maybe you're operating from your own space, but your interactions with a second person, a third person, entails that you enter into contracts. What would those contracts be? They can be either in the form of maybe, you know, a franchisee agreement, a distributorship agreement, or an agency agreement, a vendor supplier agreement, right? So for instance, when you're identifying your product and you're wanting the person, or you're wanting to buy something from this particular person, because that becomes your important raw material in terms of technology or anything else that you are using for your product, there has to be a document which will have the terms and conditions wherein, you know, none of the parties can breach that, right? And why I'm saying and stressing so much on the contracts, however minor and meager they sound or may they appear in terms of your business size, they are important in terms of the liquidity and the flexibility that you get at the time of maybe, you know, when you're closing the business with them, or you're moving out or scaling it up with them, right? So it comes very handy. So a contract in the nature of a third party document has to be in place. Essential terms of these contracts is the non-disclosure, non-compete terminology, which we use, NDNC, which can be an independent contract irrespective of the main contract, or it can have an imbibed element in the existing contracts, right? So your say for instance, I'll just give an example of an ITS company, and because that's the most, in terms of absorption and relieving, that's the most volatile industry. So there is the need that you have, people sign those NDNCs and you have the contracts done with them, because first of all, they are for a limited time frame. When you are hiring somebody on contract, the terms and conditions have to be absolutely crystal clear in terms of their onboarding, the product that they would be developing for your setup, the services and the roles and responsibilities, the scope of that, the limitations to that, and the apart from IP, of course, I will come to IP later on. But what you essentially call that, what will remain your property and what the person cannot take away, right? So that also means that the person has to be bound by a non-compete clause, which means that the person should not be able to use the technology for starting his own business for a particular term. Now, we all are aware that one size is not going to fit all. Now, these, whatever compliances, whatever documentation that we are talking about, is a broader outline of what needs to be done for a startup. But what comes in each of the document will, of course, vary from industry to industry. Now, for ITES, obviously, the set of NDNCs would be different as compared to maybe somebody who is into the beauty industry, or maybe the hospitality industry, or somebody from the travel industry. So the industry type, the product, the service would also mean that the terms and conditions and the kind of NDNC that you incorporate is going to be different. So you cannot have, a make one fits all kind of a document for this. This is a broader outline for the legal documentation that you should have in place before you actually get into your startup and you start dealing with third parties. Now, whenever it is up to you, that you are the person who is making and you are selling it, but you are selling it somewhere. With 2020, of course, we saw the onset of, and there was a hike in online selling also. That means, again, you're dependent and you're creating a channel which is outside you. Again, there has to be an agreement between how your product will be displayed, what are the terms and conditions there, what are their terms and conditions of your product being displayed, and the disclaimers, the copyright, the trademark registration. And, so it all entails that there are contracts everywhere, right? So that becomes the most important part after the founders agreement are your contracts, which have to be essentially in place, right? Now, as a layman, if I talk like a layman, I would say that the content is more important than the pages in a contract, right? When I say this, all your terms and conditions and your rights and obligations, your exit, the termination, what happens after the termination, everything has to come. Now, even if that is covered in 2 pages, it's fine. It is not about the volume of the document, it is the content of the contract which is important, right? So I covered the founders agreement, the contractual agreement, the NDNC, which is the the NDNC is the non-disclosure, non-compete agreements. Then comes the HR policy, which has to be a part of the founders agreement. But if you're not able to really identify what your HR is going to look like, you always will have an idea that, okay, tomorrow, or maybe at the end of the 3rd year or the 1st year, I will have 5 employees. Maybe I will have 10 employees. Now, that, of course, is a part of your HR, right? Your human resource is the most important, and it begins with you. Because the way you think is what you're going to execute ultimately. So your HR policy has to be in place today. Even if the implementation and its actual implementation happens after 1 year, when you have maybe more than 1 people apart from you, you have a co-founder, and you just have 2 more people working with you, right? So here I'm not really emphasizing on the startup, the size, the turnover. I'm talking about the basics which you need to have in place, which even if you're not going to apply it today, it will be applicable to you, it will be handy for you, it will be useful for you when you're actually transacting outside your own sphere, right? So the HR policy, like I said, the intellectual property is the property which comes into being the moment you have an idea in your mind. Whatever you are thinking right now, I mean, we have very young entrepreneurs also, we have students here also, and I'm sure that, they have plans of maybe getting into some entrepreneurial field, because 2020, again, I'm taking the basis of 2020 because it saw an it saw an uprise in women entrepreneurs, and with so many schemes which the government of India also announced, I'm sure that times to come we will have more entrepreneurs. All the more reason why your ideas need to be copyrighted. So what we exactly think cannot be your copyright just because because if two people are thinking alike, say for instance, I am saying something and I'm thinking about something right now, and you're also thinking the same thing. We cannot fight over what we thought because thoughts cannot be copyrighted unless they are into a compact form, they are written somewhere, and then you can get it copyrighted, right? So when a startup actually happens, when you have an idea, the ideator, the first thing the person should do is to copyright the person's idea. Because every day, and you will realize and you will agree with me on this particular point, that today maybe you have one idea, at the end of the month maybe you have another idea which is either complementing that, or maybe something all afresh, something very new, right? So you may not be actually thinking on starting something which you were otherwise going to start, right? So first thing is get the copyrights done of your ideas. Second, of course, when you're entering into a business, you have identified what kind of a business entity you will have in terms of the legal entity, whether a sole proprietorship or an LLP or a private limited company or whatever. You have identified the name of your product, and once you are going for registration of that in terms of the various portals, when you go to register yourself as a startup or try to avail privileges under the MSME or the various schemes, the first thing that you should do prior to that is to also have to register your trademark, right? So that can be your name, it can be a product. If you have a product, it needs to be patented, right? So intellectual properties actually are extremely important in times to come and today, because we have so many entrepreneurs who may be having colliding ideas also. There is so much of competition and it's such a competitive market. I would definitely like to add one more thing here, just in line with this, because it's something which is important for all of us to know, that even if one element of the product is different, the person has got a right to have a separate trademark. Of course, there are other factors to it, the usage and all of that. And I don't know, I am sure that all of us here must have, in 2020 only there was a trademark infringement, which was against Devtol and Dettol, because the packing was the same, and while you were pronouncing Devtol, it actually sounded like Dettol. So the product, and they lost the trademark case. So eventually, even if and of course Dettol, the usage has been for a longer time. So all these factors are there. But having said that, to safeguard your thoughts, your ideas, your name, your logo, your work, your product, IP is a mandatory thing, and it is an important part of the legalities that we were talking about. Last but not the least, which can be simultaneous also, are the licenses, the certifications, and the compliances, which vary as far as different industries and the products are concerned. Of course, certain licenses and registrations are mandatory, like the Shop Act license. I will not really go into finer details of this because I think all of us here would be knowing these, very well. Now, just to revert back and just to go back in time, once we have the founders agreement drafted and we have the authorization to do the business, the authorizations, we will get those in terms of the licenses and the registrations, right? So say, for instance, I have a product, I've started my business, I have done the founders agreement also, my HR policy, everything is in place. I open my office, I sit there. The first compliance, the first license that I need to get is the Shop Act license, because as far as I am concerned, I am a proprietor. In whichever legal entity that I operate from, I have to have something called the Shop Act license. Now, based on the locality, the branches that I have, each jurisdiction will have a separate Shop Act license, right? So it will not matter that, if you're operating in one area or the entire Pune city, you will just one Shop Act license would be sufficient. So that's very important. Then we have general registrations, which are required for any startup. So the moment, and I'm talking about scaling up your startups, right? So if you're in a sole proprietorship, maybe just a Shop Act license is fine. Based on the turnover and all of that, these registrations will come into being. Generally, those registrations will be the GST registration, the PAN, the TAN, that is the tax account number, your bank account, of course, is the prerequisite, and like I told you, the shop and establishment license. There are certain specialized registrations. Like I said, they will be industry centric. So suppose if you want to go into import-export business, it will be the IEC code, and the supporting documents like your PAN and everything will be required there also. But what you need to essentially obtain is the IEC code to get into the import and export business. Now here also, depending and based on what kind of a product you are importing or exporting, there would be different kind of paperwork and documentation required, which of course will depend on whether the product is, if you're into the food products or you're into electronics. So it will vary according to that, or the textiles. So based on that, there will be different documentations which will be required and required to be submitted to the authorities. But essentially, the first thing that you will require to do and obtain is the IEC code, right? Second, if it is a food business, for instance, we saw in 2020 there were a lot of different services, right? There were a lot of people who were supplying, and that was in good faith. But come to think of this, just thinking on the negative side, suppose because of the food that was supplied from a service which did not have this kind of the license which was required to be obtained, there was a fatality. Suppose somebody had some fell sick or something of that sort, it would have gone against the person, right? So even if they are home services, it's a cloud kitchen, or somebody is providing tiffins, which we normally have, right? And I'm talking about this in terms of the broader women entrepreneurs that we are talking about. Unless, and the second stage that a person wants to go into when they are opening a restaurant, or they're opening up huge bakery, or a food supply mall or something of that sort, or truck or anything, essentially the person has to obtain the FSSAI license to operate for this particular business. For the security services, it is called PASARA, which is a 1-year renewable license, which is required especially for people who are into security services, right? So these are the broader registrations and licenses that will be required to be obtained. Now, of course, I will again run through this because this is very technical. There is no way out that you will have. The digital signature, of course, is a requirement, the DSC, the director identification number, registration on the MCA portal, and the certificate of incorporation. Of course, these things are subject to what kind of a legal entity you choose, right? So then you get, ideally, once you are registered on the portal, then you also get the commencement of business certificate, and then you start your operations, and you start really getting into availing those services and privileges under whatever scheme that you have obtained for, right? So these are all the prerequisites. Along with these documents, you will also need documents that officially represent your business company's office, the address, the registered address, which has to be so in case of an MSME, it has to be a commercial premises. You cannot operate from a residential address. So it has to be essentially a commercial premises from where you should be operating. So your registered office should be a commercial premise, right? So that's a prerequisite for MSME. Then the PAN, the GST registration, the ROC registration, the professional tax registration, the PF and ESIC will all again depend on what kind of number of employees you have in your setup, which we will be looking in our slides now. Now, let's also analyze that we have been talking about the entities, and we spoke about the certificates, and we spoke about, registering yourself on the portals and the ROC and all of that. But there are certain specific privileges that an entity may have, right? So to start with, I can always think of being a sole proprietor. Anybody can think of being a sole proprietor today, because it's just the beginning point, right? So till you decide that you have a co-founder, or till you decide that you're not able to really decide what kind of a legal entity you want to get into, whether a partnership or a limited liability partnership or a public company or a private limited company, you can always operate as a sole proprietor. The necessary compliances to be in place prior to the commencement of business would just be a Shop and Establishment Act license, okay? Or maybe if you're operating in areas which are not in the PMC limits, you may require an NOC from the local authorities, which we essentially know as the Gram Panchayat, along with certain other recurring compliances. Because if you're obtaining loans, or if you're going in for certain privileges, then of course you will require the balance sheets and filing of income tax returns and GST also based on the turnover that you have, right? So there is no harm in continuing as a sole proprietor. But mandatorily with your turnover, obviously these things will be important, especially the GST. Otherwise, filing of income tax and all of that is something which is obvious. So that's the first thing about the sole proprietorship. Second thing is, in case of a partnership firm, you require registration at a local registrar, the registrar of firm, which we know as the ROC. It is all an online thing which you need to upload. Regularization of your IT returns, filing for your GST returns, and preparation of financial statements. Now, this all requires a lot of compliance, and a periodic compliance is required. Updation of the change in the partnership constitution, the retirement or admission of a new partner, any change in the structure of the purpose of the partnership firm, and all of that, right? So the compliance, of course, is mandatory when it comes to a partnership or a limited liability partnership or a private limited company. I have intentionally not included public limited company because it's very rare that people actually go in for public limited company. Usually they may start with a public limited and then eventually convert themselves into private limited when they want, because it actually gives you the flexibility of calling in for outside funding, so it becomes easier. So the most preferable mode of formation, and which gives you an upper hand for registering yourself also to all the portals and to all these schemes, whether you call it Niti Aayog or the other portals that the government of India has come out with, a private limited company is the best option available to that. Tax perspective wise, partnership liability and limited liability partnership, they are all on the same level. I, being a lawyer, will not get into finer details of the taxation part of it. But broadly speaking, these are the areas and these are the prerequisites, or these are the general guidelines which should guide a person, before the person thinks of getting into a legal entity, right? A partnership and a LLP is something which, in view of the experience that I normally have with people around this, that unless and until they're very sure of the purpose, mostly the family-run businesses run on partnership form, or maybe an LLP would be where the distinct roles are identifiable. You can really pick and choose from the roles and responsibilities, and you can really highlight and distinguish them. Where the role of the people involved is something which goes hand in hand. It's always better that you have people in the director role, and a private limited company is a better option in that case. Now, like we saw that, and we are specifically talking about the MSME, what really happened? The enactment of 2006, it came in being in 2006, but eventually I think it caught our attention very recently, right? And why was that? It was basically because, we saw we saw a certain spurge, a sudden spurge in a lot of businesses, happening. There was a lot of impetus, and it acted as a catalyst. In fact, when people they were losing jobs, and they did not have much to do, they really started thinking that we should have another source of income, or maybe they started finding new skill sets amongst them, and they wanted to try something new. That was one part of it. Of course, the encouragement and the backing which the various schemes gave. The enactment of 2006 actually saw a lot of upsurge in terms of its actual effectiveness and execution and implementation, right? So, as per the recent notification, the classifications of the industries, micro enterprises up to 5 crores, small enterprises 5 crores to 75 crores, medium enterprise 75 crores to 250 crores. Now, when I say that, the eligibility criteria changed in the revised definition of MSME, and it was based depending on the amount of investment with respect to plant and machinery, in case it undertakes manufacturing, or equipment in case it provides services. Now, in addition to this existing investment conditionality, a new criteria of turnover was also introduced, and the prescribed investment thresholds for being included within the definition of MSME also increased. Now, what happened actually in the notification was that the distinction between the manufacturing and service industries was done away with. So they removed this segregation and they brought it on a common platform, right? So that gave people a broader perspective of their own businesses, because then they need not identify themselves as manufacturing and services, because they were all under the same gamut. They were all under the same umbrella, right? So this was a major revision which was done in the MSME, the definition of what would constitute an MSME. There's a recent notification in MSME, And I stand corrected here because I think this was the latest notification which came on 26th of June 2020. I just happened to read it because we were trying to handhold one MSME recently. And here what happened was that, in this particular, as per this particular notification, the Udyam registration certificate had to compulsorily obtain this before they could avail of the classification or the reclassification of MSME. This became a prerequisite, a statutory responsibility on the government of India, right? So this was the notification which came on June 26, 2020, the latest notification where the registration, the Udyam registration certificate was a mandate, a prerequisite for all lenders. Going back to the 2020, the one that we are talking about, the revised definition, of course, Udyog Aadhaar was a government registration which was provided along with the recognition certificate. And in that, a unique identification number, a unique number is granted to the entity in order to certify it as a small and medium enterprise, right? So in the category of the indirect tax, of course, I have already discussed this. I'll just reiterate that. In the category of the indirect taxation or the consumption tax that we know as, GST also became mandatory, and it was imposed in India on the supply of goods and services. Now, this particular GST also actually faced a lot of challenges in terms of what amount, what percentage, what kind of product, what kind of service, what would constitute service, what would be a continuous service, what would be a one-time service. All these issues are something which are ongoing, but nonetheless, obtaining the GST under the indirect taxation is a mandate under the Udyog Aadhaar portal. Okay. Now, as a registered business entity, each business unit registered as an MSME working in format of whichever, whether it is a proprietorship or it is a partnership or a company, has to apply for a GSTN. It is required. And of course, every time that a business transaction is done, it will specify the GST collected and paid, etc. Right? So in terms of sole proprietorship and the other entities also, obviously, the GST payment and its applicability will be based on the turnover, but you have to obtain a GST based on the services. Right? Say, for instance, there are certain services which are exempt from GST as well. Right? So based on that, the GST number has to be obtained essentially. Now, one very important part in the whole thing. So we started with, when the ideation starts. So you start actually putting it under a founders agreement. You have what is known as your founders. It's like your
Ritu?
Hello, yes?
Yeah, a small interruption. Sorry for that. You would take some 5 minutes more?
Yeah, I think I'm on the last labor compliances.
Yes.
I should.
Thank you. Sorry for interruption.
No, I was about to ask you that. Good, you told me. Okay. So the last but the most important part which you cannot rule out are the labor compliances. In India, these are the number of compliances when it comes to covering the labor laws. Again, I'll go back to 2020 when we saw certain peculiar issues pertaining to migrant laborers. We had a lot of issues about construction workers, and we saw that in the unorganized sector actually faced the brunt of it. Right. With that, there was a new lookout. Now, these enactments, if you see, they are all old enactments. These are not new. We are seeing enactments from 1952, 48, 75, 65, 86. So none of them are very recent, except if you see, 2013, the the sexual harassment of women at workplace is the recent one, which came in 2013. There are all enactments which are very old. But we saw that, the applicability of these laws and the importance of these laws and the compliances related to labor came into actually the forefront when we came into 2020, because there were issues which were extremely critical. There were layoffs, there were the offer letters not being honored. There were people who were asked to, put papers. There were offer letters which were not honored. So these things actually opened and paved way for a lot of questions, which they made it important that the compliances are adhered to. Now, in 2019, the Ministry of Law and Justice, Government of India, also notified the Code on Wages 2019, which actually subsumes the 4 enactments related, which are all related to labor, particularly, right? The payments. So the Payment of Wages Act 1936, the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Bonus Act, and the Equal Remuneration Act of 1976, they all got merged, and it came to be known as the Code on Wages 2019, right? So that happened, and which came actually in force in 2020 with regard to summing up and clubbing up all the 4 together. Now, we've spoken about the startup, we have spoken about how you will scale it up, what will you do, what the documentation required, how will you protect it from your IP perspective, your labor, your compliance, your HR policy, everything. But what if things don't work out? I mean, nobody thinks of that, but it should be provided for today. Because tomorrow, if nothing is provided for today, there is a possibility and likelihood that you get stuck in the situation, which is not a win-win for anybody, right? So rather than having or putting yourself in a situation which is a very sorry for tomorrow, it's always better to find a way out today. And this obviously should have a place in the founders agreement, but later on, whatever understanding that you have based on your picking up of the identity, you can have the clauses as to the winding down, right? So there can be 3 major: fast track exit mode, court or tribunal route, or voluntary closure. Now, in all the 3, the first one, the fast track exit mode, is the best suited for startups, because there you can have specific terms and conditions laid down that by the end of so and so, suppose 1, 2, 3, 4 happens, there is an automatic cancellation and termination of the understanding. Now, this is the fast track exit mode, where none of the parties actually has got any way to question why, what, mera kya, aapka kya, there are no questions involved in that. The second, of course, court or tribunal is a very clear thing where you can resort for that. Of course, arbitration is something which you can provide for in your document. You can always have one person identified as an arbitrator. You can go to them, discuss whatever the arbitrator decides. Basis that, you can decide and exit from the understanding that you have. Third, of course, is a voluntary closure. That at any point in time, you can think, if you're in sole proprietorship, it's the simplest thing. You can always see that, I don't want to do with the business anymore. Now, it can always happen that, if you're dormant, that in that case also automatically for a period of 5 years, if you're in a dormant mode and if you don't do any compliances, obviously your entity will get struck off from the registrar of the companies. So that's the automatic. That's what I said, that the dormant company also is the automatic route where, within a period of 5 years, if you're not active, you will be declared struck off from the ROC, right? IBC is another way, which is a very expensive route where people go, which also saw an upsurge in the recent times. But of course, that is something if your turnovers and your company size is very big, and so these are all routes which you opt under the court and the tribunal mode of exit. HR, I have already discussed. Quickly, the ESIC, like I said, ESIC can be applicable in a manufacturing sector. The monthly salary is up to 21,000 and the employee ranging between 10 to 20. Then we have the EPF, the PF, an employee size where it is more than 20 within the business establishment and needs to have payout of ESIC. So these are the mandatory things which you would essentially have. The other side of human resource where this needs to be provided for, because it also it's a mandatory compliance. So there are regular audits as far as these are concerned, and the organization should look into this and as per the size and the employee range, start providing for the ESIC and the PF and the EPF, right? Intellectual property I have already discussed. We have what is known as the SIPP also, under which it is implemented for nurturing and mentoring the innovative and emerging technologies. This is basically hand-holding the IT and ITES, because like I told, protecting your intellectual property, right, and for the effective implementation of the schemes, right. Then I'll quickly run through some schemes for women entrepreneurs. There is something called Annapurna, on a basis what kind of products you have. There are the schemes which are floated for the women entrepreneurs especially. Then we have the Bharatiya Mahila Bank business loan, which gives the loan limit here is 20 crores. The Mudra Yojana scheme, the loan limit is 10 lakhs. Orient Mahila Vikas Yojana scheme, Dena Shakti scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Yojana, the Udyogini scheme, the Sent Kalyani scheme, the Mahila Udyam Nidhi scheme. And I just heard somebody talk about BPIO, which is a platform especially for women entrepreneurs. And your registrations into that, of course, opens plethora of privileges for you. But it is always better, and the prerequisite to all that is that you have your documentation, your legal documentation, your compliance, and your licenses in place. Now, going back to the question, these are the challenges that any startup faces: lack of business plan, lack of finance, lack of education, lack of networking skills, lack of vision, legal and regulatory compliance, and lack of framework. And I think in the previous slides and whatever I spoke, I think there's a tick mark to all of this. So if you have all these in place, nothing can stop you from scaling your business and making you successful. That's a little bit about me, and that's it from me. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ritu. Your presentation was very technical, authentic, and short and sweet. Like, it kept way with the time, and it was a good presentation. We learned a lot that I think I can say from everybody. But we do have some questions which you need to thorough us out. The first one is by Dr. Ruby Chatwal. She's saying, what is the role of labor code in the new labor codes? Please clarify.
Okay. The role of the labor court is the same. It depends on what kind of a complaint you have, right? So there is a distinction, and if I can have a specific query from her, I think I'll be able to help her better, because the role of the labor court will always remain the same, right? Questions between the labor and the management, between two labors. It can be related to your payouts. It can be related to your retrenchment. It can be related to your layoffs, depending upon the limit of the compensation claimed. Of course, it is the state tribunal or the national tribunal. Having said that, of course, the questions before the labor court remain the same. There is no differentiation in that. If I can have a specific query from her, I think I'll be able to, answer that in particular.
Yeah, we are short of time. Dr. Chatwal, you could just contact her and get the legalities of it.
Give me opportunity to speak. Ritu ma'am, you have said about the labor code, but when they had launched this, still it is on the way of launching these labor codes. That it was said that the labor codes will be no more working, and they will be switching over to industrial tribunals.
Correct. So that's where the query was. So that's what I wanted to understand. So the industrial tribunals are the tribunals which will be, handling that. But the understanding of the industrial tribunals is labor courts, because the issues which will be handled by the industrial tribunals are going to be the same, right? So it's only the name of the court and the tribunal which has changed. So precisely, that's what I wanted to know.
Yes,
what exactly was your question? So you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Bye-bye. God bless. Take care.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
There is one more question in the chat box. What compliance be needed for outside consultants? Could you be more specific? You could speak out, Pratik. What is the question like?
Yeah, so in our startup, we have hired a lot of third-party consultants in order to consult us about electronics and some software issues.
Okay.
So from that point of view, we already have a NDA and a non-compete in place.
Right.
But from like payment standpoint of view, we also have a MOU. But I don't know like how the amounts vary, because one electronic consultant, we pay him around 50 to 60,000, and there is another software consultant. He is getting paid around 6 to 7 lakhs.
Okay.
So the amounts are very varying, and like other than like we don't have any other licenses as of now, because we are still in the like development phase.
Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, for the various kind of consultants, how should the compliances be, right?
Yeah, and like based on their like not necessarily their skills or their industry, in particular with regards to their compensation.
Okay, so see, basically you are right that you will have to have a writing in place, maybe in the form the MOU or the NDA-NC, which can be a part of that, or a separate NDA-NC. So that's of course something which you have to do. But regarding the compensation and the variation in that, I think you are a better judge. I, as a lawyer, will not say that. Now, if I quote an example,
No, from taxation standpoint of view, and can we count that as an investment in our future registration? But when we
Of
decide to
course, it is
form
an
our
expense, right? So it's an expense from your end. So see the
okay,
segregation between the professionals or say, for instance, the consultants, right? So the third party consultants will be
yeah,
your investment. So it's an expense only, right? So
okay,
obviously you will be able to show it as an expense. The variation in the amounts is no criteria. And there will be two people, two professionals or two consultants who might be charging differently for their skill sets based on whatever services they're giving, maybe the experience or the kind of technology that you are, they're developing for
agreed.
you or whatever. So that will differ. So that has got that is no criteria. You can
No,
definitely
from
show that as your expense because it's something which is it is going out. It's an outgoing from your uh, profits, right? From your
okay,
gross.
so
That is, yeah,
it can be compared to like an equipment investment of some sort, like
equipment or
uh, like how we would buy a 3D printer. It would be like on the initial agreement. It would be or whatever the inception document that is there. It would be put under the
it's a
similar like
service
in a
expenditure, right? Because it is a service given by the person. Now,
agreed,
forever.
but
Hmm.
I can count it towards the investment side.
See, I can give you with my limited knowledge because I'm a lawyer, I'm not a tax consultant. But
Okay,
it will be
Pratik
treated
and
as your
Ritu.
expense. Yeah.
Yes,
And you
here.
can definitely reach out to me separately for this and
Yes,
I can
definitely.
guide you accordingly.
Sorry for the
All right.
interruption. We are now finishing on time. Like, I will like to conclude this as a massive session, and I have concluded it as like for women entrepreneur and women startups, we are no just layman's or living beings. We are actually starting a startup or we are going ahead with an enterprise. So we have to know everything, the legalities and the compliances very well. The only thing Advocate Ritu is pinching me that women entrepreneurs are not all who are having investment worth crores, but there are women entrepreneurs in the rural parts who do need help in terms of legal compliances, which are easy approaching, easy procedures, which can the matters could be solved very easily. And the very big tax factor is whether the money is available for the legal compliances to go ahead with the legalities. So, leaving the matter at that, I would give my vote of thanks. Thank you, Advocate Ritu Agvekar, for being here and giving us so much time. I will thank everybody, the dignitaries, and our esteemed audience from the desk. Thank you once again, our speaker. We had a wonderful time. I'm sure the audience had lots to ponder on and lots to implement in their future ventures. Congratulations, all the best to everybody. Before closing, a gentle reminder for all